All right, so get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into the life of one of history's most complex figures, Adolf Hitler. From aspiring artist to dictator, well, it's a wild story.
It really is. You know, you shared this YouTube video with me, Adolf Hitler's story. English app, I know it's meant for like English language learners, but there's actually a ton of great biographical details that we can really get into.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to unpack there. And I think one of the most interesting things is that contrast between his early ambitions as an artist and the path he ended up taking.
Totally. To really get his worldview, we've got to understand like the psychology behind it, right?
So the video starts with his birth in Austria, April 20th, 1889. And right away, you see this clash between young Adolf and his father, Alois. Alois wanted him to get a government job, but Adolf was all about art.
Yeah, that clash is a big deal. His dad was a customs official, so, very much about authority and structure. And young Adolf, with his artistic side, seemed to push back against that.
It's like that classic rebellious teenager story, but on a historical scale.
Right. And that tension probably got even worse after Alois died. Adolf was only 13 at the time.
The video talks about him becoming withdrawn, defiant even. You really get the sense that he was grappling with some heavy stuff like grief and maybe even a sense of abandonment.
And just a few years later, his mother Clara dies too. That kind of emotional vulnerability on top of everything else. It might have made him more, susceptible to those extreme ideologies later on.
That's really interesting. So he moves to Vienna to pursue his art, but faces constant rejection from the Academy of Fine Arts.
Imagine that. You pour your heart into something and you're told you're just not good enough.
Yeah.
It's going to be more than just disappointment, right?
It's a total blow to your identity.
Exactly. And the video really highlights how this period of hardship in Vienna, with poverty and everything, solidified his bitterness.
Yeah, it's like instead of looking inward, he starts blaming everyone else.
Right. And that's where we start to see the seeds of his worldview, his need to find scapegoats for his own failings.
And that resentment finds an outlet in World War I.
He enlists in the German army, right?
Yeah, and he finds a sense of purpose there. He's even decorated for bravery. But when Germany loses the war, it shatters him.
That defeat was huge. I mean, it just cemented his belief in strength and dominance. He saw the surrender as a betrayal by Germany's leaders.
It fueled his idea that only a powerful figure could restore Germany's glory.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, in a way.
And then the video paints this really vivid picture of post-war Germany. Poverty, hunger, anger, a breeding ground for extremism. And Hitler, with his war experience and his speaking skill.
He was in the perfect position to exploit it.
Totally. He joins the German Workers' Party, which later becomes the Nazi Party, and he rises through the ranks so fast.
Think about it. Rejected artist, war hero, crushing defeat, all against the backdrop of a chaotic Germany. It's like the perfect storm.
Yeah, it's almost like a tragic play unfolding.
He becomes this incredibly charismatic figure, promising solutions, tapping into that deep-seated anger that a lot of Germans were feeling.
The video calls him a powerful speaker. You can just imagine how his words would resonate with people who were desperate for change.
And what's even more chilling is how he channeled that anger.
Towards scapegoats.
Yeah. Jews, communists, anyone he blamed for Germany's problems. It's that classic us versus them mentality that demagogues always use.
Create an enemy to unite the masses. And he wasn't afraid to use violence to get what he wanted.
Like with the beer hall putsch in 1923.
Right, that failed attempt to seize power that lands him in jail. It's a real turning point.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't work, but it put him on the national stage. He became this martyr, this strong leader willing to take risks.
And in prison, he writes Mein Kampf. It's a blueprint for Nazi ideology, laying out all his ideas, German nationalism, racial purity, territorial expansion. It's chilling, looking back.
It's not just some obscure manifesto. It became a bestseller. His dangerous ideas were spreading all over Germany.
And the Nazi Party gains traction throughout the 1920s and early 1930s. Finally, in 1933, Hitler is appointed chancellor. It's unbelievable how quickly it all happened.
He was a master manipulator, playing on people's fears, offering simple solutions to complex problems. He presented himself as the one who could restore Germany to greatness.
And at first, he had some successes as chancellor. Economic recovery, lower unemployment, it really solidified his grip on power.
But beneath that facade, a much darker plan was unfolding.
He was systematically taking apart democratic institutions, consolidating power, transforming Germany into a totalitarian state.
just like he laid out in Mein Kampf.
Right.
It was all part of his plan to reshape Germany in his image. He created organizations like the SS and the Hitler Youth to enforce loyalty, controlled the media and education to spread his propaganda. This is where things really start to get scary.
It's terrifying how effective his propaganda was. It's like watching a nation slowly surrender its ability to think critically.
He understood how powerful controlling the narratives was. Eliminating dissent, presenting a distorted version of reality, he could manipulate public opinion and justify his radical policies. It's a reminder of how vulnerable even the most advanced societies can be.
The slow, creeping horror story. And it all culminates in the invasion of Poland in 1939. World War II begins. Hitler's expansionist ambitions are finally realized.
The invasion of Poland, a calculated act of aggression fueled by his belief in German superiority and his desire for Lebensraum, living space. In the East, it was a total violation of international law and a terrifying sign of what was to come.
It's crazy how one man's ideology could lead to a global conflict like World War II. The video talked about how Hitler exploited that post-war turmoil in Germany, but how much of his rise was due to, his own, manipulative genius versus the circumstances of the time.
It's a question historians still debate today. Was Hitler inevitable, or could he have been stopped? He definitely had this chilling ability to tap into people's anxieties, but those anxieties were real. Germany was dealing with defeat, a terrible economy, and this feeling of humiliation.
So he wasn't making these anxieties up. He was just really good at using them to his advantage. The video showed how he offered this vision of a restored Germany, free from blame and from, the people he saw as threats. That must have been a powerful message for people who were struggling.
Absolutely. He provided scapegoats, simple answers, and this sense of belonging to something bigger. It really resonated with those who felt lost and betrayed. His charisma, his rhetoric, it turned complicated issues into this good versus evil story. It made his message very seductive.
And it wasn't just words. He created a whole system to reinforce his ideology. The video highlighted those organizations like the SS and the Hitler Youth, creating this atmosphere of fear and conformity. It was like building a whole parallel society based on his twisted vision.
Those organizations weren't just about keeping order. They were about indoctrination, instilling blind obedience and loyalty, especially in young people. It created a generation that accepted the Nazi worldview as normal, while anyone who disagreed was demonized.
It's scary how he systematically got rid of critical thinking, replacing it with this blind acceptance of his ideology. The video mentioned his control of the media, education, even art. He was creating an echo chamber for his propaganda.
That's exactly what he did. He knew how to control the narrative. By silencing opposition and presenting this distorted version of reality, he could manipulate public opinion and justify his radical policies. It's a chilling reminder of how vulnerable even advanced societies can be to this kind of thing.
It makes you think about how we guard against that manipulation today, especially with social media and all the information we're bombarded with constantly. How do we even know what to trust anymore?
It's a huge challenge. We live in a world of information overload, where it's hard to tell what's real and what's fake. Critical thinking is so important now. Question everything, seek out different perspectives, and be careful of those who offer easy answers to complicated problems.
We need a mental toolkit for navigating the digital world, understanding propaganda, checking our sources, and being aware of our own biases. The video talked about learning from history, understanding how Hitler came to power. It's not just about memorizing facts, it's about learning valuable lessons.
Right. We can't just dismiss Hitler as some uniquely evil person. We have to understand the social, political, and economic factors that led to his rise, because those things can happen again today.
It's a sobering thought. And as we dig deeper into Hitler's legacy, we can't ignore the Holocaust. The video mentioned the millions who died in concentration camps, but it's hard to really grasp how horrific it was.
The Holocaust was a systematic, planned attempt to wipe out an entire people. It was a failure of humanity on a scale that's almost impossible to understand. It reminds us of the dangers of hatred and prejudice, and how important it is to fight intolerance.
The video called it one of the darkest chapters in human history, and it makes you question what humans are capable of when driven by ideology and fear.
It reminds us that we need to be vigilant against all kinds of discrimination and intolerance. The Holocaust wasn't just a tragedy for Jewish people, it was a tragedy for all of humanity. It forces us to ask, what is our responsibility to prevent something like this from happening again?
It's a heavy topic, but one we have to talk about. And towards the end of Hitler's life, we see him retreating into delusion and denial. spending his last days in that Berlin bunker while the war raged around him.
That bunker became a symbol of his isolation, his detachment from reality. He clung to this warped vision of Germany even as defeat was inevitable. He just wouldn't accept responsibility for the destruction he caused.
A tragic end to a life that started with dreams of being an artist, but led to so much destruction and suffering. The video mentions his marriage to Eva Braun just days before their joint suicide. It's almost surreal, this moment of personal intimacy against the backdrop of his regime collapsing.
It really shows his distorted view of reality, his inability to face the consequences. He chose death over taking responsibility, leaving behind a legacy of pain and destruction.
The video ends with a message of hope, urging us to learn from history, to choose love over hate, unity over division. But it's hard to balance that with the scale of tragedy Hitler caused.
It's a challenge for sure, to acknowledge the darkness of the past, learn from it, but also find a way to move forward and build a better future. It requires a balance between remembering, rejecting hatred, and believing in positive change.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive, from his early life and his dreams of being an artist to his rise to power and the consequences of his ideology. We looked at the things that helped him succeed, what shaped his worldview, and how his legacy changed our understanding of human nature and extremism.
But this isn't the end of the conversation. In the final part, we'll shift to what happened after World War II, the process of denazification, and how we can prevent these horrors from happening again. We'll also look at the complexities of Hitler's legacy and what we can learn from this dark chapter to help us face the challenges of our own time.
You know, it's hard to imagine even starting to rebuild after something as devastating as World War II. I mean, entire cities were just gone. Economies were shattered. And the emotional toll, right? It must have been immense.
Yeah, the scale of the rebuilding effort was just
Yeah.
massive. But on top of all the physical rebuilding, there was this whole other challenge. Denazification. It was like trying to rebuild a house while you're fumigating it for, like a really bad infestation.
The video mentioned how Germany eventually became a peaceful democracy. But what did that actually look like? How do you even begin to dismantle an ideology that had, infected every part of society?
It was. Well, it was complicated. There were war crimes, tribunals, of course, holding individuals accountable for the atrocities. But beyond that, it meant getting rid of Nazi influence in everything. Education, government, the legal system, and then re-educating the whole population. It was a massive project, trying to replace a culture of hate and blind obedience with democratic values and human rights.
That sounds like a truly monumental task. And I imagine there was resistance, people who clung to the old ways, who had trouble accepting what had happened.
Oh, absolutely. Denazification was a very controversial process.
Yeah.
There were a lot of debates about how far it should go, who should be punished, and how to balance justice with, with forgiveness and moving forward. It was a long and difficult journey. And Germany is still dealing with the effects today. I mean, they had to confront the darkest parts of their history and really wrestle with their past.
The video kept stressing the importance of remembering the Holocaust so it never happens again. But how do you make sure those lessons actually stick, that they lead to real change? Is remembering enough?
Remembering is. It's vital, but it's just the beginning. It's about being aware, recognizing the signs of intolerance and extremism, challenging prejudice whenever you see it. It's about empathy, understanding, building a world where differences are celebrated. It's about realizing that hate can take root anywhere and that it's our job to stop it from growing.
That's a really powerful way to put it. So it's not just on governments or institutions, right? It's on all of us to speak up against injustice, to choose kindness over hate every day.
Exactly. It's an ongoing fight. We have to be willing to challenge our own biases, educate ourselves and others, and stand up for what's right, even when it's hard.
We have to be the ones to stop the spread.
That's a great way to think about it.
The video ended by saying that Hitler's story isn't just about the past. It's about the choices we make today. His legacy is a warning, but it's also a call to action. What's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this deep dive?
Well, for me, it's understanding that we're not just watching history happen. We're all part of it. The choices we make, the things we do and say, they all shape the world. We have to learn from the past, challenge injustice, and work towards a better future. Hitler was able to rise to power because people didn't pay attention. They ignored the warning signs. We have to be better than that, more aware, more engaged.
And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Adolf Hitler. It was a tough conversation, but a necessary one. We explored the darkness of his ideology, the power of his propaganda, and the terrible things he did. But we also saw the strength of the human spirit, the ability to rebuild, to forgive, and to choose hope over hate. And remember, the power to prevent these kinds of atrocities lies not just in remembering the past, but in actively shaping the present and the future. Be aware, be informed, be engaged, and be kind.